大家好，欢迎大家收看安娜看法节目。最近呀，美国移民政策不断的调整，特别是在特朗普政府当中提出的移民改革方案当中啊，撤销入籍 denaturalization 这个议题备受关注。很多人都说啊，一旦成为美国公民了，就可以高枕无忧。但是事实上呢，政府是有权撤销某些人的公民身份，甚至呢有可能导致驱逐出境。那么撤销入籍到底是什么呢？它和驱逐出境有什么样的不同呢？谁最有可能面临这样的风险呢？今天我们特别邀请到了安娜律师楼的创始人安娜戴米奇 （Anna Dmitruk），请她来为我们大家详细的解析这个话题。Hi, Anna. Great to have you here today. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Happy to be here.
Anna，我想问你的是哈，到底什么是撤销入籍呢？它与驱逐出境到底有什么样的不同呢？And let's start with the basics. What exactly is denaturalization, and how is it different from deportation?
Right. So a lot of people are now scared of deportation, and there's also a lot of rumors circulating about citizens being deported as well. It is something that people have been saying so much recently that Trump is going to deport US citizens. So I thought we should cover this topic. So denaturalization is a process of stripping someone of United States citizenship. This is something that can only be done to someone who has been naturalized, who has acquired naturalization later in life, someone who was not born a United States citizen. There is one tiny exception that I'll cover later, but generally only people who have obtained naturalized US citizen status through some way can be denaturalized, meaning stripped of US citizenship. Denaturalization and deportation. So deportation is a process of issuing a removal order by the immigration court and basically forcing someone based on that removal order to leave the United States of America. Again, I want to make sure that this is the legal definition of deportation. Let's not confuse it with any other types of departure from the country. Sometimes people just leave because they want to or because they feel it's necessary. That does not mean that they get deported. Deportation is when an immigration judge issues an order of removal and the person is supposed to leave the country or is taken out of the country based on that order of removal. Again, to repeat real quickly, denaturalization is stripping someone of a US citizen status. It does not necessarily mean that the person will have to leave, though. So these are two different things.
安娜律师，美国公民真的可能被驱逐出境吗？特朗普政府提出的移民政策到底会影响到哪些人呢？Anna, can U.S. citizens actually get deported? And how do Trump's immigration policies play into this?
So US citizens in their status as a US citizens cannot be deported, except by mistake. Couple times I've seen that these are rare cases. Occasionally these mistakes happen, but that usually has to do with US citizen not being able to quickly prove that he or she is a US citizen. So for example, they lost their passport and cannot find their naturalization certificate or never received naturalization certificate, never got it. It costs quite a bit of money to get naturalization certificate. So a person for some reason does not have paperwork confirming that he or she is a citizen and gets caught by DHS or ICE. Occasionally that happened in the past. I think it might happen again, but that's, like I said, that's a mistake. So it should not be happening. By law, a US citizen cannot be deported. In order to deport a US citizen, what needs to happen is denaturalization, what I mentioned before. The US government has to first strip this person of US citizen status, denaturalize this person, then make a case that this person should be removed, should be deported. That's actually, these two cases can be connected, and often they are, but oftentimes it's also sort of separate cases because forcing someone out of the country, forcing someone to leave the country is not necessarily the same as stripping one from of US citizen status. So this is how it's supposed to be playing out by law. Denaturalization by law with due process and then possibly deportation. Now, what most people are saying when they say Trump is going to deport US citizens, usually they're saying it in the context that family members of people who are getting deported will leave with them, right? And usually in the media, when you see the media talking about it, they're usually talking about families, and they're usually saying, oh, US citizen kids will be deported, right? What they really mean, what is going to be happening is parents who receive deportation orders or who are being taken, detained by ICE, given deportation orders and deported, their children may be taken with them, because a lot of parents would choose to take their children with them unless there are other arrangements for the kids to stay in the United States, right? But the kids are not going to be getting removal order. The kids are not going to be legally deported. Technically, those children, US citizen children who leave the country with their parents who are not US citizens, these children can come back anytime. No one can really stop them from coming back.
好，非常感谢安娜律师的介绍啊。那根据美国移民的法律，哪些人是面临撤销入籍的风险呢？Who is at risk of denaturalization under U.S. immigration laws?
Okay, so here's where I'm going to briefly mention the exception first, so we get it out of the way. So people who pledge allegiance to a country that is hostile to the United States of America technically can be denaturalized. And I believe that also applies to people who are born in the United States. So this is something that happens very infrequently. There are very few cases that actually took place in reality. Most people who face the risk of naturalization fall under a completely different category. And that category is of people who were not supposed to be naturalized citizens at all to begin with. And the context where this usually comes up, and I have actually seen this happening in my own law practice. So usually it's when the government strongly suspects or discovers that in the process of naturalization, the applicant, back then not a citizen yet, the applicant committed some very serious fraud. Usually, again, and I'm going to give a general example that of what I've seen happening. The applicant, it would be in the context of, for example, getting either marriage green card or political asylum. So if later it turns out that the person who got either marriage green card through fraud or political asylum through fraud, the government discovers it somehow, they can go and strip the person of the US citizen status and try to deport that person.
好，非常感谢安娜律师的介绍啊。律师，我还想请问您的是，政府啊，一般都会因为什么样的理由撤销一个人的归化公民的身份？有没有什么具体的法律依据呢？Anna, what are the most common reasons the government revokes someone's citizenship? What legal grounds do they use?
So the legal grounds, like I mentioned, is fraud that was discovered somewhere along the line of getting that citizenship. And usually it has to be some pretty serious fraud, honestly. It's usually not something really tiny, because we've all seen in the news, for example, it turned out that Elon Musk was working without authorization and probably did not disclose it on his citizenship application, likely, like, I don't know, I'm speculating, right? Usually people would not be stripped of US citizen status due to some minor infraction in the past, even if it's discovered, right? So there has to be some really serious fraud perpetuated in obtaining the status that leads to later naturalization. And like I said, a lot of times what happens is the government finds out or has strong reasons to suspect that the person committed serious fraud. For example, the government catches an asylum agent, someone who helps people submit political asylum claims. So the government catches this agent on fraud, right? Brings this agent into criminal proceedings. And at the same time, what happens is the government goes through all this agent's computer files and printer files and all the paperwork in this agent's office. And they go through all of the cases that this agent touched. Or if it's not an agent, if they caught an attorney, then it's even easier. They go through all the court cases and USCIS cases that this attorney ever touched, right? So the government goes through all of these cases and they take a look at most of these cases, whether it appears that these people may have committed fraud. And in the asylum context, it's actually pretty easy to make a case when someone is committing fraud, because usually what happens is these agents that submit fraudulent cases, they use very similar templates. They basically use the same story, the same wording, the same fact patterns in many, many, many personal statements. And so the US government takes a look at these files, sees that a number of statements are almost identical, and then they go and they start reopening the cases of those people who received asylum, maybe even received asylum 15 years ago or 10 years ago, a long time ago. And so they start reopening these people's naturalization proceedings and bringing these people back to court to defend themselves. Now, it's important to remember that if this happens, it's not the end of the world if your case is a true case. Just because you happen to go through a bad agent who maybe even mixed up some facts on their own, there is still hope to go and get the underlying asylum back. But basically going through unscrupulous attorney or unscrupulous agent who commit fraud can endanger people in that way, even if their own case is 100% true, right? Because merely being in the database, in the paperwork of these unscrupulous people who frequently commit fraud and make money on it makes the applicants a target for their case being reopened.
好，非常感谢安娜律师的介绍啊。其实很多人都担心啊，过去在申请庇护的时候，很有可能有些信息不准确，几年以后会不会被翻出来影响公民的身份呢？Anna, a lot of people are worried if there were some mistakes or inconsistencies in their asylum application years ago, could that come back to haunt them now?
Well, it could. It could, unfortunately, especially now with this administration, because we have seen previous Trump's term, quite a few cases have been reopened, and the government did go back and start taking a look, and people were brought back to court to defend themselves again. Now, what's important to remember is that it is very important to be able to defend yourself, meaning to basically present the case again, and if there are any inconsistencies, then to explain them to the immigration judge. You know, and most judges, especially the older ones, they have seen their share of dishonest agents and dishonest attorneys. And so they understand how these things happen. They also understand that, for example, applications don't always get read back to the applicant in their native language, and the applicants don't always even realize that this should in fact happen to protect themselves. So if you get a fairly reasonable judge and you can explain your case, you can present your case again, and you can force the government to carry out their burden to show that your case is in fact completely fraudulent, there is a chance for defense.
好，非常感谢安娜的介绍啊。刚才安娜律师说到了，如果说有律师或者是中介参与了庇护的欺诈，还想请问一下律师，政府到底会怎么处理呢？会连带影响他们的客户吗？Anna, just now you mentioned a lawyer or immigration agent sometimes got caught in an asylum fraud case, right? So if this happened, could that impact their clients too?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It impacts their clients in a major way because, like I mentioned, I've seen multiple clients' cases. So depending on where the cases are, they could be reopened with the intent to take away the status. If the person already has a green card, there's going to be an attempt to take away the green card, and also to have the immigration fraud finding on this person's record. If the person is naturalized, there may be an attempt to denaturalize the person, take away the US citizenship status, right? Or sometimes when the person just applied for something, there can be a delay in years and years for additional investigation, right? And like I said, a lot of times it's simply enough that your case has been touched by an unscrupulous agent or an unscrupulous attorney. Now, keep in mind, the agents and attorneys get in big trouble too, right? For them, it's almost impossible to defend themselves in this kind of cases, so they get long prison terms. I have seen several large operations that actually caught unscrupulous agents and unscrupulous attorneys, multiple at the same time. And usually the fallout from these sting operations is that lots and lots of people have their immigration cases reopened, unfortunately.
安娜律师还想请问您哈，政府一般会用什么样的证据来证明这个庇护申请当中是有欺诈的行为呢？政府会去翻旧的档案，还是说有什么别的方法呢？Anna, how does the government prove someone committed asylum fraud? Do they go back through old records, or is there any another way?
So yes, they do go back through the records, usually the records on the agent's computer, on the if it's a very old case in the agent's file and paperwork, sometimes printed materials, sometimes in the printer, because some printers store this information as well. Yes, they do go back through the agent's paperwork. They take multiple statements, they compare them to each other. And when they see that lots and lots of statements are essentially the same and lots of supporting affidavits are essentially the same with pretty much nothing at all changed, well, that's when we have a problem. That's when they can start making a case that this asylum was also fraudulent.
安娜律师哈，如果说有些人他当初的庇护申请是真的，但是呢，律师或者是中介擅自改了他们的故事，那他们还能够保住公民的身份吗？Anna, what if someone's asylum claim was legit, but their lawyer or agent changed parts of their story without them knowing? Can they still keep their citizenship?
So it's all very case specific, right? It all depends on whether you can explain that you were, for example, not able to read your story read back to you in your native language. And actually, recently, in the last few years, the courts have made it a point, most courts, not all actually, but a lot of judges are making it a point to ask a person, for example, at the individual hearing, has your personal statement been read back to you in the language that you understand or in your native language? And if the person says no, then the judge would actually stop the proceedings and get the interpreter to read the statement to the applicant in their native language. But that's something I see recently. I understand that a lot of times this was not true in the past. So if it's an old enough case and the person was not really asked if they had a chance to review, to read the application in their native language, well, then I believe there is some hope to explain how exactly the statement that contains something that should not really be there has gotten into the system. Another reason that sometimes that sometimes really is true is that, you know what, the case was the way the statement describes it, because the reason these agents have certain templates or the lawyers have certain templates is because a lot of genuine, true cases were somewhat this way, right? This is how a lot of events have actually taken place, and so this is how the person can also sometimes, if this is indeed what was happening in this person's case in reality, then that's also what they can present as their defense. Now, obviously, going forward, it's so much better to prevent this than to be on the defensive later. And the way to prevent this is, of course, to make sure to review all of the materials, to make sure to write your personal statement yourself, right? Or if you cannot write for some reason, I don't know, you can type or whatever reason, you make sure that you sit down with a paralegal or with a lawyer and you tell them the story and they record the story from your own words, right? The lawyer or the paralegal can suggest certain edits to make the story more compelling, but they cannot change the facts, right? It's not okay to write something completely different. So it's very important that applicants take control of their case. They make sure to read their own story, first to write their own story, and then to read their own story after it's been translated and edited, right? Make sure that the affidavits are not done just by the template, but actually written by the people who submit them. And yeah, just take control of the case and make sure to the best of your ability, you know what's being submitted. Second thing that needs to be kept in mind is make sure to select a bona fide attorney or a bona fide agent if you have to go with an agent. It's a lot easier with attorney because attorneys are usually afraid to lose their license. So it's usually safer to go with a licensed attorney. So ask which state this attorney is licensed in, ask for the license information, double check it on that state's attorney state bar website, right? And that's going to be a first line of defense because, yes, attorneys are usually scared to lose their license. And don't just go with the recommendation by a friend of, okay, this agent gets all their cases approved. That is actually a red flag and a danger sign, okay? A good lawyer, for example, would never ever guarantee that certain cases will be approved. And a good lawyer would also discuss with you strengths and weaknesses of your cases. And oftentimes will tell you, you know what, maybe it's not worth it. Just maybe don't do it because it's not likely that you'll get approved on this set of facts. So don't just go to the first person who is recommended to you as someone who gets a lot of cases approved.
好，非常感谢安娜律师给我们的介绍。最后一个问题，还想请问一下安娜律师啊，对于规划公民来讲啊，可以做什么东西、做什么事情来降低撤销入籍的风险呢？有没有什么特别需要注意的？Anna, the last question is that what can naturalized citizens do to protect themselves from denaturalization? Any key precautions to take?
So I think the precautions here really have to be taken in advance, right? Going forward, going towards the naturalization. Because if there's some kind of fraud in the past and it gets discovered later, then the only precaution you can take is one, get a good lawyer to fight for you in court, and two, mobilize whatever resources you have to prove your case again and to prove that you did not defraud the government. Right? So you can only be on the defensive. It's always easier, it's always better to have control over your case, to write your own story, to make sure that you do not engage in fraud, to study some law yourself, right? Especially if you don't have much money, and if you have to work with an agent, it's always good to read up on the laws so that you know what is required for your case. And you don't just fall for some assurances that, oh, we're going to get your case approved 100%. All right, so be cautious, be diligent about your own case, and verify everything that is being submitted to the government as much as possible. And again, use a competent lawyer whenever you can.
好，非常感谢安娜律师。通过今天的讨论啊，我们了解到撤销入籍其实不是一个概念啊，而是现实当中很有可能会影响到很多美国公民的法律问题。所以说呢，任何涉及到移民或者是庇护申请的个人啊，都应该确保自己的材料真实完整，并且寻求专业的律师的帮助。好，今天非常感谢安娜律师的专业解答，我们下期节目再见。Thanks again, Anna. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. See you next time.
Thank you for having me.